Custom here, and in this video we are doing a rear end swap on John's 1950 Fargo. John's 1950 Fargo is back. For you new viewers that may not be familiar with this, we did a whole build on this truck last winter. John's driven it all summer. He's brought it back a few times to work a couple bugs out, but for the most part, it's been pretty good to him. We put a Fat Man fabrication, IFS front suspension in it, which gave John obviously independent suspension, power steering, disc brakes. Lowered it just ever so slightly. John didn't want to go super low. He wanted to keep it looking relatively stock from the outside, which I think we've done. Under the hood, we've swapped in a big block Chevy, which was a bit of a challenge. We had to do a lot of firework and floor work to get that big block Chevy to fit in there, but it's in there and it works really, really good. Behind that, we've got a Super T10 4-speed hooked up to a hydraulic clutch. That, since we first finished this truck, John did bring it back and I did pull the T10 out and had it rebuilt. It was just a used T10 that he found on Marketplace and it had bad synchros. It wouldn't stay in second gear. So we pulled it out, put new synchros in, all new bearings, I think second gear. Anyway, it works really, really good now, shifts nice. While it was out, for those that watched the previous videos, we had a hydraulic slave on the side of the transmission that activated the original clutch fork. We took that out and we put a hydraulic throwout bearing in, and it made shifting this thing so much nicer. The pedal, it was pretty stiff before and now it's not. So now we're moving on to the rear end. When John first brought this truck, he told me that it had an 8 3/4 rear end already swapped into it. It does not, it has an 8 1/4, which is the factory rear end. I'm not a Dodge guy or a Fargo guy. Fargo, by the way, is a Canadian, it was a line of trucks sold in Canada through Dodge called Fargos. Anyways, I'm not super familiar with early Dodges and Fargos and stuff, so I just took his word for it. Turns out it has like, I don't know, 5-something gears in it. This truck like tops out at like 60 miles an hour. 60 miles an hour, I think we're at 3,200 RPM. Did a little bit of research on changing the gears in this rear end. Couldn't find anything. Also couldn't find anyone who was knowledgeable enough with these rear ends to do a gear swap in it. So we've already got a Chevy drivetrain in it. We've got a Ford based front suspension in it. Why keep the Dodge rear end? It's a hot rod. Let's keep hot rodding it. I found a 67 to 70 Ford Mustang 8-inch rear end that is the exact same width, wheel surface to wheel surface, as well as the exact same bolt pattern. Super easy to get parts for, super easy to get aftermarket gears for. So grabbed it, and that's what we're going to be putting in this video. When John and I were calculating like what he wanted his highway RPMs to be on this truck, we decided that like a 325 gear would probably be the best. The 8-inch rear end we have has a 279 gear in it. So a good highway gear. John doesn't drag race this truck, so he doesn't need like 411s or 373s or anything like that. This is just a cruiser. He goes to the dump a lot with it. It's like his dump truck. Does dump runs with it. So what we decided was, let's put the rear end in with the 279 gear ratio, because it's already in there. It doesn't cost anything. We'll just put it in and try it. If John decides that those gears are a little bit too low and he wants some more bottom end out of it, then all we got to do, because it's a Ford 8-inch, all we got to do is just pull the center section back out, super easy to do, and we'll put some 325 gears in it. But for now, let's just try it, because it might be fine. It's probably going to be fine. It's a big block. It's got huge torque. So anyways, that's what this video is all about. We're going to lift the truck up in the air, pull this original rear end out, and start fitting the 8-inch in there. So earlier this week, Jim prepped this rear end to go in, cut the original Mustang spring perches off because this rear end used to sit on top of the leaf springs, and as you can see, the Fargo rear end sits under the leaf springs. That's an easy way to lower trucks, is if you flip the axle from underneath to on top, gives you like a huge drop. It's the thickness of the leaf pack and then half the axle tube as well. Anyways, we're gonna have to weld new spring perches on this rear end, but we'll figure that out once we get it fit in the truck. Jim pulled the center section out, just inspected it, resealed it, put it back together, pressed new axle bearings on the end, new wheel seals, and then of course rebuilt all the brakes on it. I think we'll be able to hopefully reuse these U-bolts. We're gonna try. If not, we can just get the U-bolt shop to make some new ones up. The unknown on this is if this U-joint is gonna be compatible with this pinion, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Before we pull this rear end out, we're going to take the drive shaft off and we'll get just a pinion angle measurement so that when we put the new rear end in, we can set it to the same angle before welding the spring perches on. Brakes, we're gonna have to plumb new brake lines, obviously. We'll try to salvage this brake hose because it fits already and it's a new hose. I think it should work. Use this little junction block and mount it on the original vent tube for this rear end. Should be a pretty easy, straightforward swap, I think. Jim just got the drive shaft off. So I threw the angle finder on here and we are 88.5. So what we got to remember when we put the new rear end in is set it to 88.5 and then we can weld our spring perches and it should be exactly the same. We've got our jack attachment on and I'm just going to blast these U-bolts off. And while I'm doing that, Jim's going to undo the brake line. We've got the original rear end out now, so my plan was to use these aftermarket spring perches on the new rear end, and they just sit on there. You put them where you want and you weld them. However, they are wider than the original ones, which means we won't be able to use any of this stuff. We'll have to redesign all that, which is not a huge deal, super easy to do. But what I think might be easier to do, because we're not using this rear end anymore, is it looks like these are just like spot welded on here. We can probably drill these spot welds out, pop these guys off, and just reuse them on the 8-inch rear end. What do you think of that plan, Jim?
That's a great idea.
The original rear end's up on the bench here. Jim's just gonna go, it looks like there's a little weld right there on all 4 corners, so he's just gonna go and slice those welds and see if we can pop these guys off. Boom, there we go. We got our factory spring perches off. They'll fit nice on the other rear end. Check this out. That's like a rust hole right there. I've never seen a rear end rust out before. Have you, Jim? We've got the Mustang 8-inch on the jack. We'll roll it underneath and then fit our pads. Our spring pad dropped right back into the spring like it's supposed to. So now we just gotta center it side to side and then tip it back until we are at our 88.5 pinion angle. And then we can tack weld this, pull it out, weld it on the bench. Our angle is, we're back at our 88.5 like we wanted. from the backing plate to the center of the spring perch, we are at 5 3/8 on both sides. So we're centered side to side. We're at the right angle. Let's go ahead and tack this. We're all tacked up, so we're gonna roll it out and then weld it up nice. Everything's all welded up. So we're gonna throw it back up on the table, and then Jim is mixing up some KBS seal right now, which is pretty much just the same as like Pour 15, different brand name. Brush it on over like rusty finishes like that. It's been several days now, and Jim's beautiful black paint job has dried. So he's gonna go ahead and put the rear end back underneath and bolt it in, and then we can test fit our drive shaft. And I'm hoping that this drive shaft is gonna be the right length, and it'd be an even bigger bonus if this U-joint was the same. I haven't measured any of it yet, so I don't know. Once we get the drive shaft figured out, then we just gotta go ahead and make some brake lines. Jim's got the rear end in here, and he just gave me fantastic news. This drive shaft fits, no modifications, didn't have to change the U-joint or anything. Just kabam, in it goes. Oh, you know what we don't have though, Jim? Is the little U-bolt hoops. But I think there's some right somewhere on this wall here. Brake lines are all done. We used the original hose. It fit on with where the vent tube goes in, just like factory. So those are all done now. Jim just quickly adjusted the brakes, and now he's bolting the wheels back on. The original rear end had bolts instead of studs to hold the wheels on, so we had to go to the store and get some lug nuts to work with these studs, but we're all back on the ground and ready to go for a test drive. I don't know how big of a test drive we'll do right now because we're just about to hit, I think rush hour traffic is started right now. We'll take it for a burn around the block, and then maybe tomorrow go for a highway rip.
I'm gonna grab the door after.
Driving the truck from John's house back to here, I was starting off in second gear, and it was fine. There's first gear. Still in first gear. Second gear. This is way better. We're still in second gear. Before, like going through an intersection, if you started off in first gear, by the time you got to the other side of the intersection, you were shifting into third gear. based on this little test drive just around the block, I think this was a success. We'll hit the highway tomorrow and see how it does RPM wise. 9:30 the next morning. There should be minimal traffic by this point. So we're gonna go for a burn down the highway. Pulled out on the highway right now. Third gear, we're up to 40 miles an hour. Just shifted in the fourth gear at 50 miles an hour. We'll wait till we're out of this construction zone and then open it up a little bit. Okay, we're just coming up on 60 miles an hour right now, and we are at just over 2,000 RPM. Which is rad. Before 60 miles an hour, we were like closer to 3,200 RPM. Huge improvement. 70 miles an hour, which was, completely impossible before. 2,600 RPM. Yes. Not only was this like a huge improvement for our top speed and controlling the engine, John took it for a rip up the highway before, and it was getting a little hot on him because it was running at like over 3,000 RPM the whole time. So not only did this like solve that, it's so quiet in here now compared to before. This is great. The speedometer's way off right now. We're doing 51 miles an hour right now, and our speedometer's reading like 34, 35. That's no big deal. John's got a little GPS speedometer up in here. We made it back to the shop. 10 out of 10 on this swap. The only thing I've noticed is there was a rattle I could hear, which I have just traced to here, which makes me wonder, how did somebody get a bolt in there? And two, why? Why is there a bolt with a wing nut there? All right, there we have it. 8-inch rear end swap in John's 1950 Fargo. The 279 gear ratio. If it was my truck, I'd be fine with it. I would have no issues rocking this gear ratio. It's so comfortable to drive now. Way less shifting in town, and out on the highway, it actually does highway speeds comfortably, nice and quiet at a low RPM. John, he might still want to do a 325 gear swap, which gonna give you a little more zip in town, but for me, I'd be fine with it. And if John does want to do it, it's not a huge deal. We just got to pull the center section out, swap the gears, put it back in. It's not like we got to take the whole rear end out again and start over. It's just a nice, easy upgrade. Anyways, that's the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to check out the website, lgspeedcustom.com. We'll see you on the next video.